Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon. Thank you for being here. I would like, as it relates to financial data, I would just like to have a conversation, because while the intentions of this law may have been very broad, I think at the core, financial transparency is paramount in this discussion. And I feel like those opponents of transparency find ways, sometimes creative. Back in Beaver County, our local newspapers had to go through a lot of difficulties and jump through a lot of hoops just to get some financial data that should be available. As it relates to the original intentions of the law and trying to update it, I think I would like to just focus our conversation on financial data, because I think at the core, that is the #1 responsibility in 2014, that people have access, and as you mentioned early on, online access to that data. Can you talk about what having PennWatch in place for a significant amount of time, how much easier it is just to be able to point some of this simple request to an online database of state expenditures?
Sure. What we have seen is when the legislature wrote the 2008 version of this law, it had the great foresight to give agencies the opportunity to say to a requester, if you want information and it's available on a database, we can just point you to the database without going through the, kind of the every step of this. And so anytime you have online records, as the deputy director mentioned, you see a direct correlation to a decrease in right-to-know law requests. When PennWatch was first unveiled, we received a high number of calls where people wanted to know what they could get and how they could get it, and that I believe has contributed to the reduction of right-to-know law requests in some measure. How to calculate that, I can't directly, but I can say that in the calls we've seen, people are very satisfied to be able to go get the information that they're looking for to the extent that it's available and provide it. The only complaint that we have heard about PennWatch in this regard is that when agencies put the information up, there's no backstop to determine whether, no enforcement mechanism to see if they've actually really done it along those parameters. But having said that, I think it seems to be working well, and it seems to contribute to both the core mission of the right-to-know law and also citizen access to records.
And while we don't, it's hard on the state level to self-enforce itself and put penalties in place when the state is operating a website. When we're looking at School Watch that passed the House and is now in the Senate, there was a pretty strict penalty in place for school districts that did not comply, and that was the withholding of state funds. There are safety nets so that a secretary can't just arbitrarily withhold funds, but all public schools, I think, should be held to the same standard that the state is holding itself to, and I do think we have to have strict penalties in place. I think this is important. When I look at the Children's Hospital of Pennsylvania, where they don't have a single piece of paper, I feel like when it comes to financial transparency, the days of having to fill out a right-to-know request to see where tax dollars are being spent, I feel is long overdue. And while this law went 1,000 miles in transparency, I think we need to work together to get these things not just in an introduced bill form, but implemented in law as quickly as possible. Because what we're seeing now is the more data that's available, the more access people want, and then your costs are going up, and now we're forced with a pretty significant budget increase. So I think we need to rapidly work on getting a lot of this data online. And I will say there are some unintended consequences in Harrisburg because of this law, people wanting data for the wrong reasons. I think they're seeing it in Washington with the Freedom of Information Act to the FDA to get information, and then pharmaceutical companies or investors are making decisions for financial gain. My concern is when we revisit this law, we don't allow those unintended consequences to retreat from transparency. I think we have we need to take a look at how we can provide transparency, fix these unintended consequences, and allow people to see the access to their dollars. And as well as I think we need to talk about on a local level, the information from meetings and executive sessions that people get frustrated with, and I too think that is the second step of transparency. Thank you for your work, and Mr. Chairman, thank you for calling.
Thank you, Representative.